How does Germany remember the Holocaust? How does one country remember the industrialized mass murder of 2 out of every 3 Jews on this continent? It's a huge question, not something with an easy answer, but there is a good place to start, which is the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe, the National Holocaust Memorial right in the center of Berlin. The Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe opened on the 10th of May 2005, and it's been controversial ever since. Even the date was controversial. It was supposed to mark 60 years since Nazi Germany had been defeated, but the surrender was signed on the 8th of May German time, the 9th of May Moscow time, so even the date had to be moved. When you come and experience this place, I guess you'd first think, well, what is it? As you enter the memorial, there's no sign telling you what it's supposed to be. There's no names of the victims on the side of the blocks. There's not even a Star of David. In fact, the memorial kind of abandons you. It leaves you in a space where you have to think for yourself, what is this? What could it be? What does it mean? It's not a memorial on easy mode. It's something that invites your own thoughts, feelings, and opinions. But if I were to pick a flaw with it, I would say it assumes a lot of knowledge. And perhaps in 2005, for the majority of people, you could assume that knowledge. But we live in ever more divisive times, and of course times that are further and further from the event itself. And so I'm not sure if there is such a thing as a short history of the Holocaust, but let's try and give it something of a go here. All Jews were kicked out of Berlin in the 16th century. Some Jews were invited to Berlin in the 17th century, and in the 18th century, those Jews managed to integrate and assimilate in a way that their forefathers never would have thought possible. By the end of the 19th century, there's a large community of Jews who are so well integrated in Berlin, you could forgive them for thinking, this is amazing. This is the future. This is such a liberal and accepting place. The future for the Jewish community looks bright. And of course, the 20th century would go on to be incredibly dark. One of the key turning points is that Jews were allowed to fight as regular German soldiers in the First World War. But when they lost, they'd already defeated Russia and the front lines were in France. A lot of German men, young men, came home thinking, well, I didn't lose. And then one of those soldiers, Adolf Hitler, he could go around saying to people, well, you didn't lose. It was the Jews, it was the Bolsheviks, they stabbed you in the back, they sabotaged us on the home front. You, as a former soldier who is not Jewish, you're fine, you're good. It's everybody else that is the problem. It's the Jews who failed you. But if you join me and join my party, then you can fight back against this. There is a generation of early Nazis who, this was the primary reason why they joined, to kind of right this wrong. When we get to the end of the 1920s, these young men who are joining would think, well, if only I was there, I could have made all the difference. This is, of course, why the Nazi Party has its own paramilitary, why it has its uniforms and its ranks. We see anti-Semitism becoming more popular in Germany throughout the 1920s, and it is not only because the Nazi Party is rising, because Adolf Hitler is becoming this political star, it is also because Germany is facing economic turmoil. The Treaty of Versailles, forced on Germany essentially by Britain and France, forced Germany to pay back huge bills that were just impossible to pay. The currency effectively collapsed in 1923, leading to hyperinflation. People who had just been through the First World War were told they're going to have democracy, everything's going to be fine, and instead they lost everything. There's a huge spike in suicides and deaths from preventable diseases at this time. Hitler, in November 23, marches on the streets of Munich and announces that, they've staged a coup, they're going to take over. He ends up not taking over at all, but in prison. This is the failed beer hall putsch. And when he comes out of prison towards the end of 24, beginning of 25, no one cares because the economy is doing well. The Americans have helped out. A huge amount of money has come in. And the Americans want all their money back in 1929 when we have the Wall Street crash. So Germany is now, for the second time in a decade, thrown into another catastrophic economic downturn. And it's at this point that people again start to look towards other systems. If democracy isn't working, then why support democracy? And so we start to see the rise not only of the Nazis on the right, but of the communists on the left. And the Nazis are very vehemently anti-communist, and a lot of Germans are scared of the communists as well. And when there's other politicians being, I guess, mealy-mouthed and saying we have to talk about this and do deals and we have to deliberate and debate and we have to go through legal means, I mean, Hitler can win votes by saying everybody else is an idiot. We should do it my way. We should forego these laws because Stalin isn't going to wait. He's going to invade and send Jews and take over this country. They're just waiting to destroy everything that you know and love. By the time we get to 1932, the Nazis are sitting on about 1/3 of the vote. The communists are in third place with around about 15%. The Nazis then do come to power in 1933, but only with the help of what many people call the military conservative establishment, who had tried to seize power themselves in the summer of 1932. These are the kind of old aristocrats that used to run the show. Of course, they weren't fans of democracy. They'd always looked up to the Kaiser, to the monarchy. That's how they'd made their name, and more importantly, made their money. They didn't really like Hitler. I mean, he's only a corporal, he's very crass, but they also didn't like communism. And when Hitler looked like the only way to make sure that there was not a Marxist government in power, then, well, they backed him. They thought they could control him. 3 out of every 4 members of the cabinet in 1933, when they made the deal, would actually not be a Nazi. So, you know, there'd been 20 different governments since 1919. Hitler's not going to last long. An average government only lasts 8 months. We'll let him flap about, make a fool of himself, and then replace him, because they saw themselves as the people who should rightfully be in power. Of course, the Nazis were never going to play by the rules. They come to power January 1933. The Reichstag is then set on fire. It's publicly blamed on the communists. The first concentration camps or wild camps are set up. And we already start to see the blurring of party and state. Even in the wake of the Reichstag fire, communists are arrested not only by police, but by the Nazi paramilitary, by those angry young men who had joined the party to fight for their country. And of course, it will only get more violent from here. Over the next year to year and a half, the Nazis will make all other political parties illegal. They will purge their own not Nazi enough members in 1934 with the Night of the Long Knives, when supposedly people loyal to Ernst Röhm, who wants to take over from Hitler, are purged. They get rid of everybody that stands in their way, even other Nazis. It's at this point that Hermann Göring says that the concentration camps that they have are no longer needed because the revolution is complete. And Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, steps up and says, not so sure we don't need those anymore. If you're not using them, Mr. Göring, I can take them over. And so that's what he does, and the concentration camps become larger and more professional and start to become the kind of concentration camps that you're thinking of when I say Nazi concentration camp. In 1935, the Nazi Party introduced the Nuremberg race laws that remove citizenship from Jews, black people, Sinti and Roma. They also create a law on the purity of German blood, as they call it. The charts that they produce basically say, do not mix with Jews, do not have relations with Jews, do not have children with Jews, otherwise you will be excluded from society. And of course it gets worse and worse and worse as we go. 1938, we have the Night of Broken Glass, or the Kristallnacht as it's known, when Jewish shops are attacked and people throw bricks through their windows, they set fire to them, they burn down a huge amount. I believe the majority of synagogues in this country are destroyed or no longer able to be used afterwards. After this night of violence, the Kristallnacht, why didn't more people leave? And the answer is it was hard to leave. People didn't necessarily have the money. There was an exit tax, and more to the point, how many countries wanted Germans to come in? And this is one of the sad facts of the Holocaust, is that Jews were viewed as too Jewish to be allowed to be in Germany and too German to be able to leave. Well, once World War II starts, September 1st, 1939, leaving will become all but impossible. Those who hadn't managed to leave at this point are going to find it very difficult to do so. On the day that World War II began, There is between 20 and 25,000 prisoners in the Nazis' concentration camps. Dachau, Buchenwald, Sachsenhausen and Ravensbrück are the big ones at this time. How do we go from tens of thousands of people to millions of people? Well, through Blitzkrieg, the Nazis take over huge amounts of Europe very, very quickly, and then they invade the Soviet Union, and by the end of 1941, they're stuck. They're in a stalemate. And they're dealing with not only an occupied country, but not enough manpower, not enough resources. They keep sending soldiers to go and fight in wars, and, well, they end up injured, and their tanks get destroyed, and they need to make more tanks, and they need more workers, and so they start to use foreign workers, foreign forced laborers. And in many places in Eastern Europe, they start to section off Jews. They start to put them in ghettos. All of these things are costing them money. And so eventually they make the decision to manage those ghettos, liquidate them, send people to the concentration camps. They're old and they're young, the children. Those people can't work, so they will be killed. At a place like Auschwitz, people would be selected, and if they were young enough, fit enough, of working age, then rather than being sent straight to the gas chamber, they might be sent to work. And this gives rise to the idea that the Nazi concentration camps were somehow profitable through the use of slave labor, but obviously those workers weren't making fantastic things, let's say. They weren't so motivated to help their captors. Still, when we reach the 1940s, we reach mass murder. The first use of gas chambers is at the end of 1941. As German troops enter Kiev, we end up with the Babin Yar massacre, where people are thrown into a ravine and shot. People are made to crawl onto the top of dead bodies before they will be killed. And of course, we start to see the use of incredibly efficient gas chambers at Auschwitz and Treblinka. Now, the Nazis will mostly use carbon monoxide to kill their victims. At Auschwitz, they will use a pesticide called Zyklon B. But people are often surprised to find out that actually most of their victims were killed outside of concentration camps by groups like the Einsatzgruppen, or essentially random murders, liquidations here, there and everywhere. This is why it's notoriously difficult to piece together all of their 11 million murders. Sometimes you'll see it as high as 14 million, and 6 million of those murders are of course Jews, mostly from Eastern Europe, but from all across the continent as a whole. Just to finish it off, of course, the Nazis are defeated. I mean, I feel like that's pretty self-evident. The thing is, with history, it's not easy to find everything out. It's not easy to piece it all together. It's not like in 1945 everyone sat back and went, oh, well, that's what happened. Now we get it. No, we had the Nuremberg trials. We later would have the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials. Even then, some people were sentenced very, very quickly. A lot of people lied. Albert Speer came out with his big book of lies in the 1960s. Why don't we talk about where Germany was at then? Germany was two Germanys, East and West, and both of them by that point were dealing with the Holocaust quite differently. East Germany was pretty consistent with this history. We weren't the Nazis, we were the communists. The Nazis did all the bad things and we got rid of them. That's problematic in its own way, not least because whilst they did honour some victims, they did not go out of their way to look at the racism of the Nazis and talk about the history of anti-Semitism, which was the raison d'etre of the party. West Germany, they remembered it in their own kind of bad way. In the 1950s, it was just something that people didn't really talk about. And there was a sense of being defeated in a war that they should have won. When we even get to the late 60s, early 70s, when Willy Brandt, mayor of West Berlin and then Chancellor of West Germany, is knocking about, he once said that, you know, the 8th of May isn't a national holiday in West Germany because you don't celebrate defeats. Well, I would say to him, what would victory have been? What would that have meant? Was Nazism defeated? Was Germany defeated? What was Germany trying to do? This was Nazism. It was Hitler's war. There was a turning point. The German president, Richard von Weizsäcker, in the 1980s, started to refer to the 8th of Day not as a day of loss, but as a liberation day, as a day when this country was freed from what it had turned itself into. It's the beginning of the establishment recognizing that, yeah, we were the bad guys in this situation. We now have a duty to work on that. Remember that. It's at the end of the 1980s in West Berlin that plans go into action to build a proper memorial for the Holocaust. And those plans continue into the 90s, and the Berlin Wall, which actually used to be right here, that comes down, and this country reunifies, and we end up with a huge space in the middle of town that gets earmarked for the memorial. What was the edge of two places is now the center of one, and it is the capital again. And there's an architectural competition to see what different designs there can be, what the best might be. In fact, the one that the committee chooses is not the one that won. It was a great big block that would have had all the names of the victims of the Holocaust on it. But the chancellor at the time of reunified Germany at this point was Helmut Kohl. And he said that it had a pretty big and obvious problem. First and foremost, we have 4.5 million definite names of people that were killed, 1.5 million of people who are, of course, indefinitely missing. We can assume that they're victims of the Holocaust. But if you were to take the Polish equivalent name of John Smith, how many of them would be there? And he said if families come to find the name, that might mean something to them until they see the same name again and again and again. So Kohl actually had this first plan vetoed. The plan that then won was even then adapted. This field of 2,711 concrete blocks was originally going to be thinner and taller, but the government wanted the blocks to be made a bit wider and shallower, frankly because they knew that people were going to climb on top of them. They wanted it to be safer. This means that one of the architects pulled out, leaving us with the architect or artist credited with creating this monument being Peter Eisenman, a Jewish man from New York who has actually never given it an objective meaning. So when this thing opens in 2005, people look at it and they're like, whoa, well, what is it? What could this be? Some people get quite angry about it, right? That it is kind of meaningless, that it makes no sense. How can you take something with such personal meaning as the Holocaust and make something that makes no sense out of it? Well, I can see why people might not like it, and obviously that's a matter of taste, matter of opinion, but I think it is an excellent, interesting, thought-provoking place. The first interpretations that you have of it are pretty obvious things, right? That it looks like a graveyard. Or maybe the blocks line up like train carriages going to concentration camps, or they represent buildings in an empty city. And then you start to walk through, and the ground sinks, and the blocks rise, and it's dark and cold and quiet, disorienting, and people pop out of nowhere and then disappear. It's a place that allows you to somehow get lost in the center of town and leave you alone with your thoughts. You can even look at more abstract ideas. I'll always remember this, showing around a school group. At the time they would have been 14 years old. This is 14 years ago now, so if you're out there, hey, say hello. But there was a kid that looked at this memorial, and I asked everybody. It's always good to ask school groups this because pupils they have less inhibitions. And this kid, he put up his hand and he said, to me, it reflects the absurdity inherent in racism and fascism, which I thought was a fantastic idea. The ideology made no sense. The murder made no sense. How can we make sense of it? So we'll create something that makes no sense to answer it. I mean, from a 14-year-old as well. I was incredibly impressed by this. I'm not exaggerating or lying when I say that most times I come here, I hear from a member of my groups a whole new interpretation, a whole new idea of what it might mean. Some of those things are very personal, some are very positive. Some people say, I don't really like it, I don't get it, right? Which is okay, you don't have to. The idea with a good piece of art is that it's going to want to make us talk with each other and engage and learn from one another. Now, I don't know how long my quick version of the history was, but knowing me, not that short. And so, yeah, it shows a problem with this place, which is, I think you do need a bit of knowledge. And that is answered at the memorial by the museum, which is beneath it. And the museum is very much worth a visit. They do an excellent job. There is one part of it which, if you are planning to visit, maybe you want to skip this next bit because it's a kind of spoiler, but it's this experiential part that I think is really important, because We've seen photographs and maps and numbers and dates and laws, and God knows there's been enough in this video. But one way that they really show the tragedy of what happened is by answering what I call the 6 million problem. How do you show a number that big, right? Well, they shine the names of the victims up on the wall using a projector for 2 minutes per person. 2 minutes per person. That would be 12 million minutes in total. Any idea how long that is? Maybe you're doing a little bit of a calculation now. It's a hell of a long time. It's about 7 years and 3 months. Now imagine, you stand in that museum, you give everybody their 2 minutes, and you walk out over 7 years later. It's an incredibly powerful thing. So how does Germany deal with the history of the Holocaust? Well, in this instance, I think quite well. But as in a lot of places in the world at the moment, extremism is on the rise, anti-Semitism is on the rise, and yeah, we know that the far right is very much on the rise in Germany as well. According to polling, at the moment, I believe they're around the second largest party. Now, Germans do learn about this in schools, around the age of 13, around the age of 18. You can't accuse them of dereliction of duty in that sense. And most countries don't take the time to learn the worst things that their government, their nation, a part of their identity has done. So I don't know exactly what the answer is, what the future might be, but I do know that in 15 years of being a guide here, I've come to really appreciate this place and appreciate what I've learned from it is that it is so important to know every facet of your own history. As a British person, I know we don't learn about a lot of it. We don't talk about a lot of it. And that's something that I've, very much taken with me. I hope that you've learned something here. I hope that this has been engaging. I'd love to hear what your interpretation of it is below. If you've been here, if you're going to visit here, if you'd be so kind as to hit the thumb button, and even if you don't have an interpretation, you just want to write, hey, thanks, that was interesting, that'd be great. One of the greatest things you could do is support this channel on Patreon. There's a link for that down below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.